Hello and welcome to this video, which is an introduction to Mark's Gospel. It's part of the Bible for Life pod ministry. There are three videos in this series, and we begin by looking at the context in which Mark wrote, which goes to explain a lot of what is going on and why this extraordinary little gospel has had such a powerful effect on humankind. It is AD 62, just over 30 years since Jesus himself was crucified. You are standing just outside the gates of Rome. As you watch, you see the man that you have known and served for many years being led away by Roman soldiers to be executed. He is stripped, nailed to a cross, and then hung upside down. You watch him die. The man's name is Peter, and 30 years ago, the resurrected Jesus had shown Peter that he would die by crucifixion. You are Mark, the Apostle Peter's helper, and as you see Peter's body being taken away, you remember how as a young man you had fled away naked when Jesus himself was arrested in Gethsemane. You remember how active you were in the early Christian community, and that you even had the privilege of accompanying Saul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey from Antioch. But you remember also that when the opposition became violent, you left them and returned to Antioch. Twice in your life you've run away when you thought you might die, but you recovered your nerve and tried to make up for your cowardice, and you served both the Apostle Peter and the Apostle Paul as well as you could. In fact, you gave them the very best you could, and before Paul was himself executed, he asked Timothy to bring you to him because you were so useful to him in ministry. Over the years, you have often heard Peter telling the stories from his 3 years in Galilee with Jesus. As Peter's body is taken away, you ask yourself what you can do to continue to serve these men and the Lord Jesus and the community of his followers. You decide to write down Peter's account of Jesus' life. The result is the Gospel of Mark. Mark was almost certainly the first of the Gospels to be written, and this is clearly shown by the fact that almost everything in Mark is found in both Matthew and Luke. They include pretty well every verse in their Gospels. Mark wrote down the stories that he'd heard Peter telling many times over during the previous 30 years. And this Gospel is Peter's portrait of Jesus' ministry. And this was very clearly demonstrated to me when I was in training, because there was an actor who filled a theatre both in the West End of London and then subsequently in New York and Broadway, simply by recounting the whole of Mark's Gospel as if he was Peter, and that was the performance, and it was hugely compelling. The Gospel was written in the early AD 60s, AD 62 to 4, somewhere around there, and tradition states that it was written for a Gentile, that is a non-Jewish church in Rome. It was written in Common Greek. It's very sort of rough and ready, but there's a lot of sort of earthy expressions in the language. It's brief and abrupt with a sudden ending. But it's filled with unexpected and colourful little details. The phrase "and immediately" is used 41 times, and there's a sort of sense of urgency throughout. In fact, one commentator said that Mark cannot tell a story badly. The Gospel of Mark has much less teaching than Matthew and Luke, and indeed there are really only two main teaching sections. That's in chapter 4 and chapter 13, and the Gospel itself can just be read in an hour. So I strongly advise just sitting down with some friends and reading the whole thing straight through. But read one of you reads a chapter, then the other, then the other, then the other, and do it like this. And as you get a sense of the urgency, the sort of pugnaciousness of it all. Indeed, Mark's Gospel is really like a sort of bulldog. It sort of springs out with a lot of power. One last thing to say in terms of the context and is the structure. Essentially, Mark is a story in three acts. It's written like that. So there's a brief introduction in the first, sort of prologue in the first sort of 13 verses or so, and then you have the story of Jesus in Galilee, and that leads up to the great statement in towards the end of chapter 8, where Jesus says to Peter, "Who do men say I am?" And who do you say I am? And Peter comes out with this great statement: "You are the Christ." And from then on, the next act, as it were, is the progress, the journey to Jerusalem. And that takes them all to Jerusalem. So at the beginning of chapter 11, you have the third act, which is Jesus' time in Jerusalem, him being arrested and then tried and then killed. So if you think of it in terms of those three sections, that's a good way forward.